For a very long time, Dark Souls had a bit of a shield problem. See, as you might already know, Dark Souls is a pretty tricky game, and not just that, it's one that deliberately tries to intimidate you as much as possible right from the outset. Look at how it terrifies new players right at the start with this big fat demon that drops from the sky that you're not supposed to beat until you learn to run away. It's great. But it's actually after that things get interesting. Directly after you run away from the Asylum Demon, and regardless of which class you're playing, the game will always hand you a shield and a nice, quick, reliable, one-handed weapon, implicitly suggesting that this sword and board setup is the go-to easy-to-execute strategy for new players. This simple setup is more than enough to carry you through the first area or two as you block enemy attacks and then strike when they're vulnerable. Easy stuff. Unfortunately, this is also where the problems start. Because this beginner strategy of blocking and poking is so reliable, newbies rarely have much of an incentive to do anything else. Even when, as any experienced player knows, Dark Souls is way more fun when you're using a big dumb two-hander, a lightly armoured dodging build, or a glass cannon magic strategy. Big tanky shield lads are slow and passive, and they never get to experience the same tense, visceral gameplay as the other, less safe playstyles. And because Dark Souls only gets harder, eventually new players reach this point of no return where they can't stop using a shield because they've not learned the skills to survive without one, meaning that they end up going through the entire game cowering behind a big bit of metal and never having the chance to play Dark Souls at its life or death lethal stakes best. Many never even try to parry, which is the logical next step beyond blocking, because it's harder to do, riskier, and there's no real reward for doing so. Shields in Dark Souls are what I'm going to call an entry-level strategy, and they're just one example of how much video games have improved over the years when it comes to giving us players the tools and information we need to survive while we're still learning the ropes. Everything from how Torbjorn in Overwatch has a turret that aims automatically, or how Kirby in Smash Bros has bonus jumps and a spammable fun move, or how most RPGs start you off with a nice, reliable tank DPS healer trifecta right off the bat, is an entry-level strategy, and these easy-to-execute, reliable techniques are a crucial lifeline for newer players. However, as you might have figured out, entry-level strategies also highlight a bit of a problem. One thing that video games still struggle to do is to teach us how to advance beyond the basics in order to improve our skills and push our limits, leaving players stuck having less fun than they could be because they're too afraid or lack an incentive to explore new, more advanced styles of play. And that sucks, because a huge part of the enjoyment of so many games is being able to slowly but surely develop your skills and discover a game's depth, which you're just not able to do if you're stuck viewing things from a safe, boring surface level. In Hitman, the game uses mission stories to sort of tour you around each level and show you some easy scripted kills. But for some players, the mission stories are all they do, meaning they never really get to see the game's freeform stealth problem-solving potential for themselves. In Bioshock, your starter wrench-electric shock combo is so reliable that many players just keep upgrading those two things because they work on everything, and that way they never have to worry about ammo. And we've all seen that person with a level 80 starter Charizard and no other Pokemon. It's weaker and less fun than actually trying to build a team and catch them all, but some players have just never had an adequate reason to try. These tools were all designed with the best of intentions in order to help players get over that initial difficulty hump that comes with learning any game, but they're accidentally so all-consuming that they actually disincentivize doing anything else. So, that begs the pair of questions. How do the titles with the best learning curves use entry-level strategies to introduce us to a game whilst also convincing us to advance beyond them? And did FromSoft ever manage to make shields and blocking work as something other than a boring noob trap? Yes they did. I can actually answer that one, even if it did take them 5 games and just over a decade. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's lay some ground rules first. If you ask me, this phenomenon of people getting trapped using nothing but entry-level strategies and never trying to advance beyond them is really a problem of motivation. The only reason why players don't transition into more skillful, hopefully more fun styles of play is because they lack a good reason to, and I think there are 3 main ways that games can provide one, each playing off a different element of our psychology. Games can force us to adapt through the stress of difficult challenges, they can incentivize optimizing our understanding by making deeper, more complex gameplay more fun or more powerful, and they can also directly appeal to our sense of pride by gating optional rewards and accolades behind challenges that necessitate playing at a higher level. 3 ways of duping you into playing better. Huh? Yeah? See what I'm doing there? Alright, fine, my comedy talents are wasted on you lot. Let's start things off nice and simple with that first one. Forcing players out of their comfort zone by cranking up the difficulty is the obvious way to encourage them to learn some new skills and promote some deeper considerations about strategy and technique, but this has to be done very carefully. If players aren't armed with the correct training and knowledge, difficulty jumps or new scary challenges can actually force them back into bad habits. This is what happens in Dark Souls, but also in other games too. Look at Metal Gear Rising. It's a pretty forgiving game for the first hour or so, encouraging players to go wild with super aggressive attacks, but once you reach the Blade Wolf boss fight, the game starts throwing in attacks that you have to parry in order to get an opening, something that most players will have probably never even attempted outside the tutorial. What this means is that inexperienced players will probably just continue to not parry and will muddle through the Blade Wolf boss fight in the next few levels by defaulting to their basic spammy techniques, finding the game more and more difficult, and from their perspective, more and more unfair, right up until they reach Monsoon at the halfway point, a boss fight in which parrying is basically mandatory. Unfortunately, by this point it's too late for these players to learn, and so they're just out of luck, and either have to spend time practicing this basic move, or just give up. Stressful situations are great for catalyzing a change in strategy when players already have the information and experience they need in hand. But without it, they'll just get more and more entrenched into whatever they were already doing, even if it doesn't actually work. Compare Metal Gear Rising, which for the record is a great game in all other respects, and the way it surprises players with parrying, to other similar character action games which use these difficulty jumps to more gracefully teach players advanced concepts instead. Hi-Fi Rush is great at this. It has plenty of enemies designed to get you to incorporate tactics beyond your basic light-heavy combos. There's stuff you need to grapple to, various types of shield, enemies you need to stagger, and yes, stuff to parry. But it always makes sure to introduce these concepts in a non-combat environment first, usually as some sort of platforming challenge. This means that you never get taken by surprise in the middle of a fight and can instead get right down to the fun process of mastering how to fit them into your combat style right away. Additionally, the way everything in Hi-Fi Rush works on the beat, both your attacks and the enemies, gives struggling players a nice bit of foundational knowledge to work from, helping to avoid those panicky situations where you can't think of anything else to do but mash out attacks and hope for the best. Of course, another way to use difficulty and other external factors to get players to improve is to attack these basic entry-level strategies directly as the challenge ramps up, forcing players either to change the way they play, or to lose. But this too needs to be done carefully. Look at a lot of battle royale games for example. Sneaking around and scavenging like a little rat creature is an easily accessible and pretty fun way for new players to dip their toes into a game and learn the maps, but it will never actually win you a game. At some point, you have to fight, and the better prepared players are always going to win. That means that eventually, new players will have to start from scratch and begin learning how to play aggressively because it's the only way to win, and that's not a very fun realization to come to. A better way to do this is to gradually wean players off those easy noob strategies by introducing new gameplay elements that make them harder to use or less reliable. My Sweet Baby XCOM is a great example of this kind of thing happening. In order to stop players from hunkering down and overusing the noob-friendly but too reliable Overwatch mechanic, the second game in the series gradually introduces a bunch of new aliens, like the delayed AoE codex, cover-destroying robots, and sexy snakes that pull teammates out of formation in order to make defensive play gradually more difficult. Overwatch still has its place in XCOM 2, it's just no longer the #1 strategy it was in Enemy Unknown, because by the mid-game, there are too many problems it can't solve. Another implementation of this will be the gradual introduction of enemies with weak points. You can't simply spray and pray forever and still expect to survive against Halo's hunters, Half-Life Alyx's armored zombies, or basically anything in Dead Space. Not only does this teach players to actually aim, the additional challenge means they'll probably start having more fun as well. This actually brings me onto that second way that games can encourage players to perform better and rise above safe, easy noob strategies, and that is to appeal to a player's need to optimize. Making entry-level strategies weaker and less fun compared to other higher skill options, the players will naturally be incentivized to start using. One of the most obvious examples of this can be found in crafting systems in logistics games. Many such games let you gather and craft stuff by hand while you're still getting to grips with the mechanics, but actually making a factory and automating these processes will always be quicker and more fun, because that's ultimately what the game's about and what it actually wants you to be doing. However, this optimizational approach can present a problem. By making entry-level strategies less powerful or less fun, so as to incentivize getting better, games can often end up just punishing people for not being as good or for sticking to simpler playstyles, particularly in competitive environments. For example, Torbjorn's simplistic, automatic playstyle also makes him immobile, predictable, and easy to take out by competent players. Kirby's light, floaty controls are very forgiving, but that also makes them very easy to KO. And fun, idiot-friendly, play a bunch of lands to bring out a big dumb dinosaur decks in Magic the Gathering are fairly trivially shut down by any deck with removal, which is, most of them. This dynamic is also why Sonic the Hedgehog tends to be so divisive. The natural entry-level strategy in Sonic is to go slow and steady, but this is really boring and means you can't access any of the best routes. Only experienced, speedrunning players actually get to have fun and play the game as it was clearly intended. A way to avoid this kind of exclusionary design, where players need to abandon their entry-level strategies before they can start having fun and winning, is to make the thrill of skillful play come not from a strict increase in power, but from risk, both allowing new players to take on a level of challenge they're comfortable with, whilst also keeping experts in check by making them more vulnerable. Racing games are probably the most obvious example of this paradigm in action, and it's why they make such great party games. Players are naturally encouraged to go for shortcuts and boosts because it means they'll get around the track faster, but this also means that they'll be more likely to crash, creating some exhilarating skill testing moments, but also ensuring that players confident enough to try the shortcuts don't simply win automatically. The F-Zero games even take this a step further by directly tying your car's boost to its health. Going faster is great, but it lowers the amount of damage you can take before a crash will wipe you out of the race completely, massively raising the stakes. This also means that it's possible for newer, safer racers to take advantage of the risky play of superior players by sneaking up on them and giving them a quick bash to run them off the track. It's awesome. Games with a currency system can also facilitate this kind of gameplay, like how certain roguelikes give players the chance to spend health or take on additional challenge in return for greater rewards, provided they survive. Newer players don't need to bother with this stuff until they're ready, but there's always the temptation of those optional goodies, encouraging them to, essentially, gamble on their own skills, which is not only a tangible incentive to advance to the upper echelons of gameplay, but the added danger also makes things more fun. I think the best game to play with this dynamic though is Counter-Strike, and it's a large part of what makes the game so eminently playable at both high and casual levels. In Counter-Strike, the cheap and cheerful guns new players gravitate to, like shotguns and SMGs, are pretty forgiving and encourage playstyles that aren't too dependent on pinpoint aim, map knowledge, or managing your finances. More experienced players, however, will favour more expensive rifles and snipers. Most of them have better range and damage than their cheaper counterparts, but also a commensurately higher skill floor, possessing worse recoil and accuracy when moving. This means that using one effectively is a greater test of skill and a greater risk should you mess up. Not only do you risk running out of money and having to start next round with just a pistol if you die, but you can also hand the guy who just killed you your fancy new gun for free. As players get better at the game and want to test their skills, they also have to take on more risk, which only makes the game more exciting, while still letting newbies compete, because even cheapo guns have their place as reliable workhorses. Utility items also have a similar dynamic. They can open up entirely new strategies, like allowing you to block sightlines, breach guarded rooms, or defuse bombs faster, but in order to get your money's worth, you have to actually use them correctly and not just flashbang yourself like I do. You can even choose not to buy armor if you aren't planning on getting hit, allowing ambitious CSers confident in their abilities to save some cash each round, meaning they can afford something like the mighty $5,000 AWP. A sniper rifle that can kill in one hit, but good luck getting a bullet to land if you're not crouching, dead still, and looking down the scope, which is to say, very vulnerable to a noob with a shotgun sneaking up right behind you. Now that I mention it, that element of pride is the final way that I could find that games use to convince people to play better. Sure, you can tie advanced strategies to survival or power, but nothing feels better than a shiny sticker saying that you are a good little gamer. And a lot of the best games that encourage us to do our best know this very well. To go back to character action games, these titles are famous for their use of letter grades to judge your performance at the end of each fight, with the thrill of getting an S rank and the shame of getting a D being enough motivation to really work on not getting hit or string together mega combos, which just so happen to be the most fun ways to play. It's a fantastic way that games get us to do what they want, without actually having to include any additional mechanics. The power of motivating players with accolades and emotional rewards is it means that they can rise to whatever challenge they think is appropriate, while also keeping additional goals in sight for them to shoot for later on. In Pizza Tower, a hectic, fast-paced platformer, just escaping from each level within the time limit is pretty tricky. Doing so after getting all the collectibles and maintaining a big combo streak in order to get an S rank is even harder. But beyond even that, looping around to do the escape sequence twice in one time limit isn't needed at all to get 100% completion, but offers real pizza pros an insane challenge worthy of their mastery. Optional super hard challenges standing in the way of the very best gear, or some sort of cool gated off area, can also be a great way to achieve this, because conquering these obstacles is both a reward in of itself, but you also get that cool feeling of exclusivity as a bonus. Something like Doom Eternal's Slayer Gate challenges are a fun example of this. Your reward for beating all of them is the Unmaker, which is a really cool, slightly phallic alternative to the BFG, made weirdly even better as a vanity item because you actually don't really need it. You've already beaten the hardest challenges in the game, and it's not even that good. But it's cool, so who cares, you know? There is a potential issue, however, when it comes to newer players who can't beat optional challenges and that need to stick with entry-level strategies for a little while longer. The presence of obstacles they can't surpass can cause inexperienced players to waste a bunch of time trying to beat them anyway, or just demoralize them. I've seen the witness's first few optional puzzles completely stump newer players, and rather than encourage them to seek out the answers for themselves, it just scares them off, which isn't good. To reiterate, I've seen people, the person in question wasn't me, I'm very clever, I beat the witness first try. Because of the potential for optional challenges to demotivate players that should be striving for mastery, many of the games with the best secret optional challenges use them in such a way that they're completely invisible to players not good enough to take them on, and can only be accessed by the most dedicated experts who've already progressed down that journey to mastery. In, say, Celeste, new players can just go through the story, which has a fairly gentle difficulty curve, and occasionally have a go at getting a few strawberries, which represent optional tests of skill for players looking to test their boundaries, all the while blissfully unaware that there are entire levels reserved for players who'd actually find them fun instead of frustrating. By going off the beaten path, you can unlock the B-sides, C-sides, and some of the Crystal Heart levels, which are way harder than anything in the base game, and serve as the real test for people who found the story just a bit too easy. Crucially, without subjecting players who simply aren't good enough to levels that they'll never be able to beat and will simply come away from demoralized. The best part is that once players have gotten good enough to beat the game, Celeste completely drops the pretense and makes the presence of Crystal Hearts super obvious, because by that point you're skilled enough to start hunting for the optional challenges even if you weren't aware they existed until now. And in boss fight centric games like Hollow Knight, the game wisely locks off all of its toughest challenges behind optional content you need to explicitly opt into. In order to fight the real final boss, you not only need to do a bunch of optional challenge fights scattered around the world to upgrade your dream nail and collect some plot related items, but you also need to demonstrate mastery of advanced platforming concepts as well, like the nail bounce to get through the White Palace. And if you want to discover all the secrets, you've even got to do bullshit like the Path of Pain, which is 3 hours of my fucking life I'm never getting back. Anyway, as you've probably seen, player motivation, particularly when it comes to accepting more responsibility and challenge and moving beyond entry-level strategies, is a difficult thing to pull off. Games are just as likely to demoralize, underpower, or scare off players in an attempt to get them to play better as they are to actually get them on that awesome road to mastery. And that's why I think the most successful games actually just use all three. I think this is the reason why blocking and defensive play as an over-centralizing entry-level strategy was such a difficult problem for FromSoft to fix in their post-Dark Souls games. They only ever came at the problem from one angle at a time. Dark Souls 2 and 3 introduced a bunch of enemy types specifically designed to break your guard or to flank you, making defensive play way more difficult and basically just robbing players of a perfectly valid playstyle that they might have actually enjoyed if it weren't so heavily punished. Sekiro actually has a suite of more defensive, less risky options for players who are just starting out, particularly when it comes to the shinobi prosthetics. But outside of some very specific hard counters, most of them feel kind of cheesy and weak, compared to a more risky parrying and countering focused strategy, which is clearly what the game actually wants you to do. And in Bloodborne, there is nothing quite like the do-or-die rush you get after beating monsters like the Orphan of Kos once you're confident with the game's hyper-aggressive playstyle. But this focus exclusively on the hardest way to play means that newbies, who naturally gravitate to safer, more measured playstyles, get basically nothing in the way of support, and in one pretty funny case, get outright mocked with a joke shield that calls you a coward. None of these games really managed to fix blocking and defensive play as an entry-level strategy, making it either non-viable, boring, or just plain depressing to try. And that's not the fault of any of these games. They are of course all great, with the exception of the bad one, you know which one I'm talking about. It actually wasn't until Elden Ring that FromSoft really got things right, giving players a nice safe beginner option in the form of shields without shackling them to blocking or making it suck. The first way they do this is to give every character archetype multiple potential strategies. They all get a shield and a one-hander, just like in Dark Souls 1, but each of the classes also get a second weapon set, like a magic, a bow, dual wielding, or a two-hander, giving players more than one strategy to work with in the early game, and ensuring they won't start defaulting to defense when the game gets tough. Elden Ring also makes defensive strategies for players who do commit to them much more challenging and fun, thanks to the addition of guard counters, which are a kind of counterattack that you can do out of a successful block, allowing shield-based characters to put out a decent amount of damage for a change, whilst also making actually dropping your guard once in a while part of optimal play. And finally, Elden Ring simply introduces a second entry-level strategy in the form of spirit summons, which give newbies a helping hand that experienced players can safely ignore. The perfect foundation for an ego-boosting challenge run. This also frees up the game to make blocking a little bit less powerful in the early game, because players are always going to have a second crutch to fall back on. All this serves to create a game that succeeds where FromSoft's magnum opus fails, giving players a few crucial lifelines to cling to, but leveraging them both, in particular shields, in order to drive players towards mastery and playing more tactically rather than away from them, preserving the trademark brutal difficulty and unforgiving atmosphere the series is known for, whilst also giving it a smoother, more accommodating transition into the mid and late game than many much easier titles. Also, and this is just a tiny thing, the Wretch character class, which is the one designed to be the go-to character for experienced players attempting a second playthrough, is the only one that doesn't start with a shield, because if you're picking it, Elden Ring is fairly confident that you know what you're doing and don't need an entry-level strategy to help you out. Getting better at something is one of the most rewarding things a human can do, but as I'm sure you're aware, convincing people to shoot for something other than the bare minimum is pretty hard work. Ironically, it's our very instinct to make games as easy as possible, centralize our play around reliable strategies, and preserve our egos that causes us to cling to entry-level strategies to begin with. So, as much as games do to convince us to play a bit better and understand them on a deeper level, a lot of the responsibility for improving our skills still lies with us. Sometimes, we've just got to remember how good breaking through that wall of progression and journeying up to the peak of mastery felt in the past, and then to use that knowledge to inspire us to take a chance and push our limits in search of something even better. That's why real Dark Souls experts know that the best place for your shield isn't between your face and the boss, but on your back, giving you extra stamina regen so you can spam R2 on your Zweihander even more than you already could. Jesus Christ, this thing is broken and it's right there in the skeleton graveyard, like it's the best strength weapon in the game, basically for free. Whoa, man, what were they thinking back in the day? Ugh. Luckily, Elden Ring would never give you something broken, basically for free, accessible just off the beaten path in the first real area, right? They'd never do that, would they? No! Hello friends, and welcome one and all to the After the Video segment, a part of the video that causes about 15% of people to instantly stop watching, and if you think that's going to defeat me, well, you need to try a little bit harder than that. Anyway, in these segments, I like to point you loyal viewers in the direction of some cool internet things that I found in the past few weeks, and also give you a small hint as to the topic of the next video in the form of the background footage. That is, of course, assuming I choose to stick with that idea. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. I abandoned 2 video concepts before settling on this one, so who knows. The first thing I'd like to shout out is a YouTube channel by the name of Liam Triforce. He's a YouTuber best known for some comprehensive analysis videos on everything from Mario to the history of entire consoles. And I think what really sets his work apart from a lot of other people doing the same kind of thing is that Liam takes a much bigger picture point of view and uses familiar touchstones to talk about entire eras of gaming. For that reason, his best works are his looks at the evolving design of things like the Metroid Prime trilogy, and even more so the GameCube and the Wii, going into detail as to the rise and fall of these 2 consoles. He's also got a great video about putting a gnome in a bucket in Half-Life Alyx, to the point that it might actually be my favourite video he's made. It's absolutely great, well worth the watch if you want to see someone do an absolutely stupid challenge run. Great stuff. Next, I'd like to shout out the beautiful, terrifying army of people with disposable income that are my patrons. Each one of them contributes to helping this channel keep going, and without them, I would have probably given up years ago. As a show of thanks in return for supporting me, my patrons get early access to videos, bonus content, special behind the scenes looks, and also a mention in the credits. If you would like to join them in supporting the channel, a donation of just $1 for 1 month is worth more than an entire lifetime of ad views, so if you want to ad block my stuff after doing that, feel free. Of course, if you'd like to pay a little bit extra, I don't know, like $10 a month, then you'll get something a little bit extra in the form of a voiced shoutout from yours truly. My current mysterious benefactors are Algebrut, Ali Wright, Andrew Labrano, Asaran, Auna94, Brennan Spalding, Brian Natariani, Constantine Amend, Corey Girard, Cosmix360, Daniel Metjes, Das Kangaroo, David Setzer, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Digleteer, Dotwo, Ecton, Edward Franklin Woods, Eugene Bulkin, Gazkul, IFR93, ISAW Darno, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Jordan Gear, Lee Berman, Mace Winter 54, Mark Vallant, Nate Graff, NWDD, Oliver Marhofer, if I pronounced that wrong please tell me, Patrick Romberg, Peter D. Tomasak, RedditX, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Sheldon Hearn, Simon Jacobson, Steve Riley, Strateger in Ultima, The Forbidden Shrimp, Tin Markovic, Ty Guerin, Teaghorn, Tyler Duncan, Uprising, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Brantmeyer, Zach Grendel, and Chow. Whew, okay, that's me done. Have a lovely evening, and wait, why did I say that? That's not on the script. Whatever, don't have a good evening. Screw you, bye!